We're joined by Colin Reed, who is the chair of the Economics and Finance Department at SUNY Plattsburgh and a columnist with the Plattsburgh Press-Republican. And Jay Bryan is a business and economics writer who has recently retired from his beat as a columnist with the Montreal Gazette and is now enjoying the good life in retirement in the city of Montreal, not packing up the van and heading to Florida.
Not yet.
Put. Good to have you both here. Welcome. Let's begin with the Fed Chairman, Janet Yellen, making some very public appearances in Chicago earlier this week. And basically, she got a lot of attention recently where she talked about maybe interest rates may change. And she kind of backed off that a little.
She made the mistake of being a little bit too specific, talking about how maybe once they reached an unemployment rate that would be considered a sign of a fairly healthy economy, interest rates might start rising about 6 months after that. And I think now she's gone back to Alan Greenspan's writings to learn how to obfuscate a little bit more successfully. The markets took her far too seriously.
She's saying the economy is still coming up short.
Right, she's even backing off of their former number of 6.5% unemployment rate as the benchmark, which when we reach that, we would start adjusting our policies. I think she wants to create a little bit more flexibility for the Fed right now.
And saying that the rise in interest rates probably will come, but now not really even giving much of a time frame.
She is an economist. Economists will tell you what will happen or when it'll happen, but they'll never do both.
And obviously investors taking note this week when she made that announcement, the stock market responding.
Yeah, they were happy that interest rates are, I mean, they're always happy that interest rates are going to stay low for an extended time because it's been like a intravenous feed of high test coffee into the markets for a while now.
And I won't ask every month, but we're the second or third month of her tenure now. I'll ask one more time. She's doing fine. She hasn't, I think last time you said she hasn't made any major mistakes.
Yeah, now she's made a minor mistake and quickly corrected it, and I think she's finding her feet. If that's the biggest mistake she makes this year, nobody will criticize her much for it.
A CEO in the hot seat on Capitol Hill this week before a couple of hearings. Mary Barra, the new CEO of GM, getting grilled by Congress over the company's failure to recall 2.5 million vehicles that it knew it had serious safety issues with, the ignition switch, that led to a number of crashes, about a dozen that led to fatalities. So she was facing the obvious questions on Capitol Hill. Did the company clearly know about this? Why did it wait 10 years? And
also, why didn't, this isn't a question to her, but why didn't the National Highway Traffic Administration jump in and shove GM, hey guys, maybe you'd better do a recall? It's very sad because she's a path-breaking woman, the first woman to run GM, and she's getting blindsided by something that happened mostly before she was in the boss's chair. But it does look like it's very, very difficult to excuse a company that knew that there were at least some accidents that had led to fatalities. It's not entirely clear when they reached a number of accidents that would be kind of statistically significant, because when you're making hundreds of thousands of cars, you're always going to have some accidents that involve just about any model. But I think it was clear relatively early that the Cobalt, the car that we're talking about, a small Chevrolet, was not a great car, and that there was at least one problem with it. There were a number of problems with the Cobalt, but one problem, which was the ignition switches that could just turn off without warning while you're driving along, and thereby also turn off the airbag, so that you don't have power, which means the power steering and the power brakes don't work very well. And if you have a collision, you don't have an airbag. So that was pretty horrendous.
Primarily in cases where I guess people would have a heavy keychain, and
yes,
perhaps
exactly.
the keychain would turn the key.
Right.
It's also a little bit different from the Toyota case too, in that this is an easily verifiable problem,
yes.
whereas the Toyota case was difficult to verify. I think that they're handling it more deft. They learned from the Toyota case, and after all, GM is, the motto at one time was good for GM is good for the country. So I think they're getting a little bit more of a softball treatment, actually, given probably a little bit more of a severe occurrence than Toyota.
And how's been their response? I mean, since the beginning of this year, they have now recalled about 7 million vehicles altogether. Some having to do with the ignition issue, but a number of other issues. So they've
and the president, Mrs. Barra, has been significantly publicly apologetic about this. She hasn't just tried to sort of stonewall, which is, I think, very wise.
And I know one of the questions asked was, did the bankruptcy in 2009 play into this at all? Did it delay the company acknowledging the mistakes here? Also, does it come into play when it comes to the possible compensation of the victims? Because legally, I guess the company doesn't have to compensate those victims if it went bankrupt.
Well, presumably, though, maybe before that, but once they clearly know something has occurred after the fact and still didn't remedy, I don't know if they'd have quite that protection anymore, but it probably does reduce their liability a little bit.
But it would look so terrible to treat victims differently based on a legal technicality that it would be very, very surprising if they were to do that.
Right.
And you talked about Toyota. As far as the black eye for GM, they're handling this better than Toyota did 4 or 5 years ago with their recall and problems, because Toyota paid the price. They lost a pretty good market share.
Yes, and they lost a reputation that was absolutely solid gold. They're, I suppose, probably building it back now slowly, but it's a hard thing to rebuild quickly.
Too early to tell if that may happen to GM, but it doesn't. The signs don't seem to be there that they're going to pay a price for this, depending on obviously what may be coming out in the weeks ahead.
It's really hard to know what the reputational price is right now, but I just, as a kind of a car buff who has been rooting for the American companies at least not to go completely belly up back during the terrible years a few years ago, I find this just so terribly disappointing because GM has actually made enormous strides. It's come out with a number of models that are excellent. You know, Chevrolet models, the full-sized one that was really a mediocre car for a long time and now is one of the, according to Consumer Reports, one of the best cars on the road. Cadillac, which had been completely overshadowed by imported luxury cars, coming back in a pretty strong way with a number of very good models. So very, very sad that they have such a huge problem here now that's going to overshadow that for a while.
This week on Wall Street, the three dirty little words seem to be high-frequency trading. This is coming after journalist Michael Lewis's new book and also an expose on 60 Minutes this past weekend, claiming that highly sophisticated computerized trading on Wall Street is rigged and that the small investors are getting robbed to the tune of billions. Is there...
I'd feel better if it was highly sophisticated computerized trading. It's more taking advantage of the speed of light and carefully positioning, strategically positioning trading stations so they can intercept trades. Typically a large trade will have to be routed through a couple of different floors. So when they see part of that trade going through one trading center, they can intercept and get to the second trading center before the second half of the trade gets there, buy the stock and then sell it to the second trader coming in. They might make only a penny or two per transaction, but you do that over millions, literally hundreds of millions of shares a day, and you make a pretty handsome profit. But it's also relatively easy to fix. James Tobin, a Nobel Prize winning economist, when he looked at over speculation in foreign exchange at one time, he proposed just a penny tax on every transaction. So you impose a penny tax per share for all the long holders of these assets. It's not going to make any difference if somebody's going to hold GM for the next 20 years, but it's instantly going to put a halt to these kind of shenanigans that are just really trying to interject middleman transactions costs into a system that had almost completely rid itself of middlemen and transactions costs over the last few years.
There's another fix as well, of course. There's the new IEX, the brand new exchange set up by a former Royal Bank of Canada trader and a bunch of associates that has taken not most of the trading that goes through Wall Street, but a very rapidly growing percentage of the trading. And what they do is they simply delay all of the trades by not a heck of a lot, something like a fraction of a second, so that the guys who do what Colin was describing, which is called front running, who get in there and they can see a trade beginning to happen on a few different exchanges, and they can get in there and they can buy the stock that you had wanted to buy for $10, and they buy it for $10 and sell it to you for $10.01. Can't do that because everybody is delayed exactly the same amount on that exchange, and within the exchange the problem then becomes eliminated, and they've gained the loyalty of some very significant so-called buy-side institutions, people who run pension plans and people who aren't brokers acting for others, but who are acting for their own clients and have an interest in stamping this sort of thing out. And now, apparently, Goldman Sachs is shifting a significant trading there, which, I mean, that's the biggest, most prestigious name on the brokerage side. So that looks pretty significant.
We heard this week the FBI was going to investigate. They
have been for the last year
this
already.
This is completely legal?
Well, it is legal so far, although there was questions about 6 months ago with the shenanigans of whether some of the trading houses, the floors, were actually cooperating to give some of the advanced trading information to these guys. So it's nothing illegal, but it could be claimed that it's unethical and certainly serves no useful financial or public purpose.
That's right. It's clearly corrupt. It's like it's a way of skimming off some of the economic value, that genuine economic value that's created by stock trading, and adding no value whatsoever. And it's also implicated in some of these flash crashes that we've had, because these trades have to happen so fast that they're controlled by extremely high-powered computers using equations and algorithms that have been developed by these brilliant people who've been diverted from more useful purposes to make a lot of money, trying to make a penny a share on stocks. And when something goes wrong and the situation described in the algorithm seems to be happening, but it isn't really happening, and everybody sells at once or everybody buys at once, you have a real disruption of stock markets. It's a genuine danger. It's not just a kind of a little deer tick sucking a little bit of blood out of the system every time someone makes a trade, but it's something much more serious than that from time to time, and you never know when the big flash crash is going to come.
And of course, the millions and billions they're making from this are depressing the returns to the rest of the market too, so it has an effect of discouraging the rest of us from trading because we don't feel there's a level playing field. I think that's an effect that partly explains why people seem skeptical going to the market right now. The level of participation in the marketplace right now is actually at a historic low from recent history, and this certainly doesn't help.
Let's talk about the Quebec election. We're just days away now. We're as of Friday. We're here on a Friday evening. The election is on Monday, and in the closing days of this election, month-long election, it seems that the parties and their leaders have been reverting back to some of their tried and true issues. I guess that's always common as you get down to the wire, that they'll go back to some of the core issues to really try to drive that point home to voters in the closing days.
The governing party has really been driving the choice of issues. They did that even before the election came along. They did that with their so-called values charter, which was supposed to ensure that the public service of Quebec and all public employees, and public employees in Quebec includes a lot of people, not just civil servants, but doctors and teachers and all sorts of people whose jobs are funded by the provincial government, would have to behave in a completely secular manner, wouldn't be able to wear any badges of religious identity that would be conspicuous. And that word is crucial, because that means that if you wear a little crucifix, that's not considered conspicuous. But if you wear a headscarf or a yarmulke or a turban, of course, that is pretty conspicuous. So for a Christian to be caught up in that, you'd have to wear a cross, the size of a dinner plate. So it's one of these rules that it's very cleverly and, in my mind, slimily designed to be completely neutral and equal for all religions, but in fact, it gives Christians a pass and discriminates against everybody else. And everybody, I think, who's looked at it carefully can see that, but there are a lot of rural, less well-educated voters in Quebec who are frightened of immigrants who come in and seem to be dressing in ways that they're not used to and behaving in ways they aren't used to and adhering to religions that are not traditionally very well known in Quebec. And they're frightened by that. And the government has done its best to frighten the daylights out of them, and very successfully so. That seems to have lost a lot of its force, though, since the Parti Québécois itself did a good job of reminding people that its real raison d'etre is to have Quebec secede from Canada. They were kind of soft pedaling that, but then they got a star candidate who kind of pumped his fist in the air and talked about how cool it would be to have that new independent country, Pierre-Karl Péladeau, the head of the Québécois Empire. So then they plunged in the polls, and they went from territory where they would probably win a majority and run a government that would let them do pretty much what they wanted, to probably lose, and possibly even let the Liberals win a majority. Since then, we don't know exactly what's happened. There's been a debate where the Liberals leader didn't perform well, and we haven't seen a poll for a number of days now. But there's another...
the Liberals had been leading.
The Liberals had been leading so strongly that it seemed they might not only form a government, but a majority government, which is, of course, a crucial distinction. A minority government means you have to form a coalition with someone to get anything done, and you can't do much. That's what the PQ's been doing, and not with much success. Hasn't been able to create any jobs at all in the past year or so since they've been in power. Latest development, Madame Marois, the premier, the Parti Québécois leader, who's been banging the drums about political ethics, because that's always been a strong point with the PQ, which legitimately can claim to have cleaned up much of the election financing process. Oops, she's very embarrassed now because there's an investigation by Radio-Canada that says her husband went out and got money using means that were not legitimate under Parti Québécois rules to help finance her run for the leadership back in 2007 when she became leader of the party. She's denying it flatly, but they have a number of sources, and if this story holds up, it could give the Liberals a real nudge.
And the third party,
the CAQ,
has been talking tax cuts, but they picked up some ground in the polls, but not enough to make really much of a difference?
Well, we don't know. Their leader, Mr. Legault, was very aggressive during the last debate and really, made a good impression as a strong leader. And he's sort of saying a plague on both your houses with all this sort of identity stuff and ethics stuff. He says what we want is tax cuts. And I think Quebecers are very, very wary of being the most heavily taxed people in North America. That seems to have hit a chord. His party did go up several points in the latest poll that we've seen. Hard to know if that's going to hang around, if that lead will really be...
One of the big issues for the PQ was the language laws, and a few weeks back we had heard that the Premier was not going to agree to a debate in English. Did she back off, and was there a debate in English or only in French?
French.
That was the one in only debate, or they had several in, but only
there have been
French?
There have been two debates, and she didn't do very well in the first one, and she did, I think, somewhat better in the second one. The English aspect of the second one was the Liberal leader making the blunder of saying that English was an important language for world commerce, and it would be a good thing for people in a Quebec factory that wanted to sell things to the United States or to other foreign countries to be able to speak some English. That really, really hit a sore point with Quebec unions and with many nationalist Quebecers, because Quebecers like to think that, yes, it's fine for people who run a company to speak English and go and do some exporting, but in Quebec, here at home, we should be able to live our entire lives in French. And that may be unrealistic, but Mr. Couillard was very unwise to raise that point.
So it looks close going down to the final days.
It looks at least uncertain. We won't know if it's close because we don't know how much this latest bombshell about Madame Marois maybe being just as naughty a political financier as the other party leaders, how much impact that'll have.
And the Liberals still driving home the point that this is really
a referendum election. Yes, that's right, because of course that's true.
On this side of the border, New York's governor is up for re-election this coming fall, and that's why many people thought that he was really wanting to get this tax rebate and tax freeze plan pushed through the legislature. He did so. It's in the budget. It will provide a tax rebate to homeowners if their municipalities, their school districts stay below the cap, and then there would be a rebate if in the second year they then cut costs more and consolidate services. So Andrew Cuomo looking to appeal to a lot of homeowners and property taxpayers who pay a lot in property taxes in an election year.
It is, and this is one of the highest, well, it is the highest tax state when it comes to property taxes, a share of income. As a matter of fact, it's significantly above the second highest tax state and almost twice above national averages. So he has a valid concern. I'm not convinced this is the best mechanism to address some of the issues, but he's really trying to get the electorate a little bit fired up and taking it to the local municipalities to insist on very fiscally conservative local budgeting. Of course, the municipalities say in return that it penalizes those municipalities that have been trying to do a good job and keep costs low and look for shared services, because now you're asking us to do more. So a municipality that hasn't been doing anything like this has a lot more fluff to easily be able to, more tools to be able to do that with.
There was the one compromise where they would allow municipalities that over the past couple of years have already consolidated and are already sharing services that would count toward this. So
Right.
there was that concession.
There is, Vermont is trying to do a similar thing with school tax. And they had kind of a clever solution that if you really want to have a luxury school tax in your jurisdiction because maybe your income profile in your area can support it, then you'll pay a little bit of a luxury tax to everybody else. So it'll discourage people from spending a little bit too much, but if they choose to spend over these caps, then they're going to have to subsidize everybody else. And that way it can help alleviate some of these problems. I think that they'd be smart to take Vermont's advice.
Now, some municipalities say they've crunched the numbers and they don't think that the homeowners are going to get checks to the tune of $350, which is what the governor's office has been saying. The governor will end up with egg on his face if it turns out that those rebate checks are a lot less than what was promised.
I think so. When you promise a lot and then deliver only a little, people remember that.
Another part of his tax plan was to cut the tax rate for businesses, especially manufacturing upstate, which they did. They cut it from about 5.8% to 0. How effective of a tool will that be to keep businesses here, make them happy? Maybe they'll expand here and bring in other business with a tax rate that low.
Well, it is low, and of course you combine that with some of the benefits of reduced property taxes or even income taxes because the startup in New York, it can be significant. But of course the concern that's often expressed is this is a good way to attract businesses in, but what are you doing to the businesses already here? And what are you doing to the businesses that aren't manufacturing? Or for that matter, what are you doing to the businesses that are the small mom and pops that might be running as a partnership, as a sole proprietorship, and not within that corporate structure? There's really nothing in it for them, and those are the people that are most loyal to this area.
There is a utility tax, though, that I think is being eliminated as part of this budget, which they were paying significantly for their energy cost. That will go. It looks as if they may be targeting, again, folks from Quebec, where up there they're paying in the range of 8, 9, 10% or higher.
Corporate income tax in Quebec, I think a little over 10%, maybe 11%. But corporate income tax rates in Quebec are pretty reasonable when you combine the provincial and national tax rates.
They're quite a bit lower than the States.
Yes, the killer, although it's hard to know because the effective tax rate in the United States comes way, way down. There are just so many loopholes. And the corporate tax rate in Quebec really isn't the relevant problem when we're talking about attracting investment. People who invest in Quebec to start a business generally plan to live in Quebec and have employees in Quebec, and they're going to be paying the highest income tax rates, I think, in North America. Quebec tends to be kind of neck and neck with, maybe Nova Scotia, but very, very high income tax rates in Quebec. Has made some efforts to deal with that over the years, but they haven't been consistent or sustained. And unfortunately, we still retain that number one position that we don't want to have. It's an unattractive place for a business leader to live, even if it's a good place to run a business.
I guess if New York is offering the 0% rate, at least maybe that gives it a leg up when it comes to Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, some of the other border states. If you're a Quebec company looking to cross the border into the States, maybe have a presence in the U.S.
Certainly, and of course a leg up over Quebec. If it's even lower than Quebec's pretty reasonable corporate tax rate, sure.
This week, New York also revised its agreement with Alcoa, the big aluminum manufacturer in Messina, New York. Alcoa has 2 plants there, has for more than a decade. The original deal was that Alcoa had to keep 900 jobs between the 2 plants in Messina in exchange for cheap hydropower it gets from New York State. And Alcoa raised a number of eyebrows earlier this year in January when it announced it was closing one of those plants, the East plant. It's going to shut it down over the next 2 years. The East plant is the plant that has been talked about for a huge modernization project, $600 million. The Alcoa, with great fanfare last summer, seemed to say we're moving ahead with this. In reality, they've moved ahead with the first phase, a cleanup of the Grass River and the St. Lawrence River, I think primarily Grass River, but they haven't fully committed to the modernization of the plant, and I think a lot of people are wondering what the future is there now. New York agreeing to now cut back to 750 jobs to keep that agreement in place, but people are worried up in Messina and wondering what this means.
And of course, that's the biggest employer in that area as well, so it's quite significant. I don't haven't given up all hope, but though Alcoa worldwide has been scaling back a little bit with low bauxite and aluminum prices. But they're still one of the major aluminum producers in the entire world, and they do more value-added aluminum than just about anybody else. The car industry is increasingly looking for lower weight designs as well. So I think the Alcoa's strategy is to mothball some of these plants just so it has them online and able to expand in the future. I don't think it's the end for that
still
operation.
Move ahead with that, with the modernization at that plant.
That sounds like part of a long, sad history that we know a lot about in Quebec, when you try to subsidize a company into creating jobs, and then the company takes all of the money and a few years later says, oh, sorry, we have to close the plant, or we have to shut down half of the plant. What are you going to say? We're going to whip out the subsidy and demand that you give it back to us. Then the company will shut the other half of the plant. So you put yourself in a very, very difficult position, and certainly our experience in Canada has been that these kinds of subsidies don't seem to create permanent jobs. If you can create the conditions for a business to be permanently profitable, excellent training and help them out with the infrastructure and stuff like that, that seems to maybe give you a better shot at hanging on to the jobs.
The company does have about 1,000 workers there now, as you mentioned, one of the largest private employers in the North Country. About 200 of the workers are going to take early buyouts so that there won't be layoffs as a result of the closing of the East plant. But I think a lot of people are wondering about the future there, and if they're committed to this project in the long run. So that'll be something certainly that we'll keep an eye on. Let's wrap it up at the end here, talking a little bit about baseball. Spring is here, the season has started. A couple of exhibition games in Montreal over the weekend drew thousands of fans, 47,000, 50,000 fans packing the Big O. And once again, reviving some talk about is it possible to get Major League Baseball back to Montreal? Do you get the sense that there's a real push in the city to bring Major League Baseball back?
I don't. We had a real push a number of years ago. There was a project to build one of those lovely new stadiums that are sort of close to the center city and a size that makes it a kind of a more enjoyable and intimate experience to watch a game, because the Big O is really not a great place to watch a baseball game. And it fell flat on its face because there were a lot of baseball fans who'd love to be able to see baseball games, but there are not a lot of taxpayers who'd love to shovel $400, $500, $600 million into the pockets of zillionaire baseball owners and zillionaire players.
Which we've seen in the U.S. They've built a number of these stadiums, Camden Yards in Baltimore,
that's right,
elsewhere where they've done this. And it does make it a wonderful experience in the heart of the downtown. And that was talked about in Montreal, but you haven't heard of any new push that there may be support for a stadium like that.
There are still baseball fans in Montreal. There are a lot of baseball fans in Montreal, but I don't think there are enough people who are willing to stick their necks out in a city that is not really super strong economically, in a province that it would really have to be provincial aid that would push them over the top, and the province doesn't have any money. The province is in debt up to its eyebrows. That won't stop them from subsidizing probably an NHL team in Quebec City, as one of the PQ candidates, Pierre-Carl Pelleteau, wants to do with government money. But of course, hockey is not a sport in Quebec, it's a religion.
Exactly, and that's been talked about for a number of years as well, getting the Nordiques back to Quebec City, and there would be much more of an appetite to finance a stadium and other incentives to get hockey back to Quebec City than over baseball in
That
Montreal.
seems to be the case, yeah.
All right, well, on that note, we want to thank Colin and Jay and you for watching. That is our business edition for this month. For all of us here at Mountain Lake PBS, I'm Tom Hellick. We'll see you next week.